We welcome you in, everybody, to another installment of Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Rocco Miller and Kevin Sweeney. A pretty big show in store for you guys today, as we will be revealing the top 16 overall seeds starting in the South Region here in segment number 1. But before we get into all that, which everybody is anticipating, we got to talk about what happened throughout the course of the week in college basketball. Rocco, we can start with you here and talk about the biggest winners of this past week since we last visited on Monday.
Certainly. Good to be on with you, Fax, and good to see you, Sweeney. I think we got to start with the Florida Gators. It's right there at the top of the board. Not only did they get the big win last Saturday at Auburn, that will last forever, best win anywhere in the country, but they followed that up on a tight turn on a Tuesday night by beating Mississippi State on the road. That added just another valuable piece of really good silver/gold to their resume. And on the same night, Tennessee fell at Rupp Arena, not a bad loss. And the evaluation led to myself and many of us agreeing that Florida belongs as a number 1 seed for the first time this year during this cycle of 2025. So shout out to the Gators. Not only a big win at Mississippi State, but to be able to do that back-to-back is so impressive. The way they came out of halftime in that game, went on a monster run. To leave Chris Jans, a well-respected, great game plan coach, lost like he looked about 8 minutes into the second half. That's a hell of an offense Florida has. Next, I had Michigan. I'll save a couple for Sweeney. But Michigan, to me, this was one that was more through the bracketology process. You figure, okay, you held on and beat Purdue by 2 at home. That's a great win, et cetera, et cetera. But that one win alone, even though you would, usually to move the needle from a bracketology standpoint, you got to win on the road, do all those little things. But Michigan basically needed another win against the field. It added another top 10 level win they had one at Wisconsin and one at UCLA, which are really nice road wins. It's not a top 10 level team per se. So now they've got a really nice mix of both road wins and a high-end home win with Purdue in the mix. They still only have 5 losses. They're well above 500 in quad 1 at 6-3. And they did lose a couple in quad 2, but overall, all their meaningful games, they're 17-5 with no bad losses. They only played 2 quad 4 games. So Dusty May, Kyle Church, the whole staff there did a great job scheduling. And they're 5-2 quad 1-2 away already, 7-5 away neutral. So the Wolverines, in all these comparisons for the Final 16, which we'll get into soon, they were just winning out over teams like, Michigan State, obviously, Illinois, the teams in their own league. But I even have them ahead of St. John's and Ole Miss and others. So it was just enough juice to give Michigan the nod and get into this top 16.
Yeah, I think those are some great points, Rocco. And on the Florida front, to be able to do it after Condon goes down 30 seconds into the game on the road in Starkville against a really hungry Mississippi State team in need of a signature win like that, that's even more impressive. And then our very own Jeff Goodman, obviously reporting earlier today that Micah Handlickton could potentially be back in the mix for Florida down the stretch this season and could be burning that used-to-be-planned red shirt. The Gators are just going to keep getting better, and if they can get back to full strength, I'm not sure anybody's going to want to see them come March. Sweeney, coming to you now. Rocco said he left a few for you. He mentioned Florida and Michigan. Who do you feel like were some of the biggest winners of this past week of college basketball?
Yeah, I look closer to the bubble. I thought BYU getting that road win in Morgantown was pretty massive over West Virginia, another potential bubble team. They really needed a quad 1 type road win. They get it. Now you get an opportunity here over the next couple days at home against K-State and Kansas to further boost that resume. Staying in the Big 12, Kansas State beating Arizona as they continue to be the hottest team in college basketball. Really excited about them. 6 in a row, heading out west this week to play the Utah schools. See how they navigate that. But, a state team now that is, I think, certainly warranting serious discussion. And we'll see if they can win enough down the stretch. And then I'd highlight in the mid-major realm, George Mason winning at St. Louis, continuing their dream season. I still think the at-large is going to be a hard push, but it's not out of the question. Circle that game next Saturday at ECU. Opportunity to get a massive win. If they could win that, things open up for them a little bit. But a team that maybe could benefit from the wins above bubble metric. They're strong in the resume metrics front, not so strong in the quality metrics. The quadrants necessarily don't favor them. Can those resume metrics lift George Mason into at-large contention? I guess we'll have to monitor that over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely a situation to monitor at the mid-major level as we trend forward with bubble talk, which is everyone's favorite activity. Sweeney, we'll stay with you and let you tee things off here for biggest losers of this past week in the college basketball world.
Yeah, I think West Virginia would have been one of the ones I did mention. On the other side of that loss, Wake Forest, to me, probably the biggest one. A team that was really holding onto its resume based on no bad losses and a strong resume metrics. You lose at home, a game you controlled the entire way against Florida State. Just a disastrous loss. I don't think it closes the door on them by any means, but that game Saturday on the road at SMU now gets very, very important. Like if you're Wake and you don't want to have to beat Duke to get in the NCAA tournament, I think you probably have to win at SMU on Saturday, get another quad one win, and hope that somewhat negates the bad loss from Wednesday. But that was the last thing they could afford after doing a great job playing themselves back into consideration here over the last month or two.
Yeah, and that was brutal, especially with how good Steve Forbes and Wake Forest have been at home in his tenure in Winston-Salem. It was an uncharacteristic unraveling down the stretch for the Demon Deacons. I think they were up 16 with 7 minutes, 30 seconds left in the game, and then ended up losing it with Johnson taking that three towards the end with 11 seconds left. So definitely a big loser. Rocco, coming back to you now. Anybody that Sweeney didn't name that you feel like they had their stock drop this week in college hoops?
Yeah, well, certainly, as we have the theme of top 16 bracket reveal coming up tomorrow on CBS and our show here today on Field of 68, I have to mention Michigan State. I think they were a team that was certainly trending towards being included, and that home loss to Indiana, that really kind of torpedoed their chances from where I'm sitting at least. It really shook up their numbers. They dropped to 24th in net. They obviously have a bad loss now, or at least a subpar loss. It qualifies in the category 2B, as we like to say in bracketology. So anytime you lose 2B or below, you're almost always losing to a team not forecasted in the tournament. And that's the case with the Hoosiers at this point. So you look at a Michigan State team now that has that quad 2 loss, and their main road win that they're banking on is Ohio State, which is a really good road win. Ohio State's in the field right now. But it's not like a top of the board type of win. They don't have any wins against the field on a neutral court. And of course, we've talked about it almost every episode. The Spartans played the softer part of their Big Ten schedule in the first half. Now they're going through a gauntlet. So things will change probably in a week. They have some chances to get big wins right away. But that really cost them from probably seeing their name called tomorrow. And then more in the realm that Sweeney was talking about, I'll throw Oklahoma in that mix. Oklahoma, nothing wrong with losing at Missouri, of course. They're a very good team. Oklahoma's not expected to win that game, but they're starting to take on quite a bit of water in their boat. They've lost 4 or 5, and they're really getting in right now based on those 3 wins in the non-conference, which still count the same over Arizona, Michigan, and Louisville. But they don't have a true road win. Technically Arkansas is right there on the bubble, so you could count the Arkansas. But out of 6 qualifying games in the top 2 quads on the road, they're now 1-5. So the more and more they add road losses, that's starting to really hurt them on the bubble. And they're also starting to get close to that 500 number I talked to in meaningful games. They're now 9-8, so they're still safe to be selected. But you're looking at a team that's only got 3 SEC wins with more SEC games to come. They play LSU tomorrow at home. It'd be a big danger zone if they lost that game.
Yeah, definitely in agreement. And before we trend to the top 16 reveal, as we were talking about, Rocco, either of you guys got any more stock risers or stock droppers from this past week that you feel like we didn't mention?
Yeah, I think Arkansas themselves, just winning a game is good for them. They were just so far behind on wins, trying to catch up to their losses they had early. So they pick up a home LSU win. It probably didn't mean much to most people. But for me, it got them back to within 1 game of 500 in their meaningful games. We know about their road wins at both Kentucky and Texas. So spoiler alert, that was enough for me to sneak Arkansas into the field for the first time all year today. And they're obviously trending in the right direction. Their quality of play has improved. Their confidence levels improved, et cetera, et cetera. So shout out to Arkansas for being in a good spot for this moment. Obviously, they're teeter-tottering and all this, like most of these SEC teams. And then I would also just say, in general, UConn. UConn going to Creighton. They've been stuck in that 8-9 area for weeks, but a road win at Creighton significantly got UConn back in a favorable position. You understand the committee saw how Liam McNeely totally dominated that game, Faxon. And with a healthy McNeely going forward, continuing to maybe be that X factor with Caravan and the rest of the crew, UConn can win a lot of comparisons. They almost got up to a 6 seed for me. They're my best number 7 right now, and obviously trending up with a really, the 2 best road wins you can get besides St. John's, I guess, which they still get a chance to do. That'll be at the Garden in a couple weeks. They've already got the road Marquette and the road Creighton. So if they get all 3, I mean, UConn's going to skyrocket up the boards even further.
Yeah, McNeely going for 38 and 10, and then the 2 rings Baldy quip from Hurley. That was just an instant classic. I'm not a UConn fan myself, but you got to respect the pure comedy of Dan Hurley and what he does. Sweeney, anything else to add on stock risers and stock droppers before we do the bracket review?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered it generally. I do think, so, as Rocco mentioned with Arkansas, there's teams that just like holding serve is a very powerful thing this time of year. SMU popping Pittsburgh, is that going to change a ton in the grand scheme of things? Maybe not, but like you just sit there and wait for other people to lose around you, and all of a sudden maybe you're in the field. Or VCU that held serve, got a decent road win at GW. They're creeping into the mix here. So again, a win is a win this time of year. It really helps push you a little bit closer towards that cut line.
Yeah, Phil, that's a good point. And Arkansas, also the beneficiary of that Wake Forest collapse we were talking about in Winston-Salem as well, as they've snuck into a lot of people's fields, kind of backdooring in that thing right now. So let's talk South Region. Time now to reveal our top 16 seeds, and we're going to start in the South. We've got Auburn as the number 1 overall seed, Houston as the number 6 overall seed, Mark Pope's Wildcats at the number 11 overall seed, and then Rick Pitino's St. John's Red Storm at number 16 overall on the 4 line after the most recent loss to Kyle Neptune and the Villanova Wildcats. Rocco, we can start with you. I'll let you and Sweeney divvy this up how you please and go 2 apiece on the South region. But talk to me a little bit about what you see and what Fielding the 68 is projecting in this region with the top 16 overall seeds.
No, this looks very reasonable for a consensus decision. I don't think there's any disputing Auburn being the best team, and of course that puts them in the South, so that kicks things off. With Houston, I had them 7 overall instead of 6, but we, as a group, talked about this throughout the week. 6 or 7 was totally acceptable in my view, so definitely okay with them being 6. And I think the committee's done this with Houston before, where their resume may not be as good as like a Texas A&M, but the fact that they're the 3rd best team in net, 2nd best average when you put all the performance metrics together, very intimidating. And from a seeding standpoint, what's the difference between 6 and 7? It's really just getting Houston into the South instead of Texas A&M. That's really the only difference. And then with Kentucky, I'm 1 off with them, but still a 3 seed. So I'm good there. Like I had them 12 overall. The group has them 11, all good Wildcat fans. And even better, Kentucky gets to go to Atlanta. I know they love Atlanta if they can win 2 games, of course, but this 16 reveal is for us to have these, fairy tales that everybody's going to advance with chalk. So we'll play that game right now. Atlanta would be very favorable for a 3 seed Wildcat team. And then I think St. John's is like the really tough one. I had St. John's number 17 overall. I really struggled with it. That loss to Villanova earlier this week knocked them 3 and 4 in quad 1. So just, under 500 doesn't look good when you're going for these elite spots in the bracket, the top 16 spots. Now, clearly that road win at UConn actually got better. And if you look at St. John's 4 losses overall, Faxon, they've lost by a combined 7 points, I believe. So, yeah. These guys are 7 points away from being 25-0. So that there's a lot to like about St. John's, but then there's also like you're waiting for some more of these big wins to pile up. They have 3 wins against the field, the 1 big road win at UConn. But everybody else they're getting compared to has a lot more juice, like an Ole Miss, like a Kansas, etc. So that's where I got stuck. I ended up going with Ole Miss and Kansas over St. John's for those last spots. But I really don't have a big problem with the group deciding on the Red Storm.
Yeah, and St. John's such an interesting case study because you feel like if they could just shoot the three ball even a little bit better and like at a not bottom 10 in the country level, then they would be a juggernaut offensively and defensively, where they're already top 5 in most metrics across the board. But I love the set call from Patino to take the lead, and then obviously Villanova responding and ended up getting the win. That was a great game, great Big East hoops this past week. Sweeney, throwing things to you now, breaking down what we're seeing in this South region. We've got Auburn, Houston, Kentucky, and St. John's. Rocco seems pretty aligned with where he's at in comparison to the consensus. How do you see the South region?
Yeah, I mean, no major concerns, questions, etc. I thought it was well done. Kentucky somewhat capped. I don't know. I wouldn't say that they can't get to the 2 line down the line, but I think it's be hard for them to get off that 3 just because of the quantity of losses they're likely to have. But it's going to be hard to knock them off the 3 line because of the quantity of big wins. So, I think they're going to settle around this spot here all the way until Selection Sunday. Houston, I actually had a little bit lower. I had them more in that 7-8 range overall on the seed list, but again, it's very close margins. I look at the when I see the resume metrics with Texas A&M, that really stands out when you're comparing them with Houston. Same thing with a Purdue. Who could be in that conversation as well. Purdue also 14 quad 1 and 2 wins versus Houston's 10. So I think watching Houston's placement will be very interesting from the committee standpoint. And then as Rocco said with St. John's, does the lack of quality at the top of the resume limit them a little bit? I think if they're not in the top 16 today or Saturday, excuse me, I would be a little surprised if they're playing their way in over the next couple of weeks, just because of really a lack of opportunity compared to some of these SEC teams that already might be ahead of them. The significance of that, of course, would be St. John's potentially getting to play in Providence first weekend of the tournament as a protected seed. They would love to be in the Northeast, and I'm sure Rick would love a little homecoming in Providence.
Yeah, that would be absolutely electric. I'm sure the crowd would be wild. And to kind of further a point you made, Rocco, about St. John's in relation to a team that we actually have in this South region with them as well. When you look at Houston, their 4 losses are by a combined 14 points, and 3 of which have come in overtime, including that 1-point overtime loss to Texas Tech. So they've got kind of a similar thing going on to St. John's, where it's like you're a couple breaks and a couple results different. Now, obviously, they stole one in Lawrence at Allen Fieldhouse as a result of that as well. But you're talking about 2 teams with very marginal losses that could be flirting with perfection if they were able to execute an OT a little bit better in a couple of these games.
No doubt. But wins and losses have to count for something. And you're right. With the win at Kansas, I mean, their win percentage was less than 1% for multiple points in that finish. And that's their best win by a mile. So they've also benefited from the good luck, bad luck thing. Without that road Kansas win, they're probably stuck as a 3 seed. So that's a massive difference. And so, I think Houston's fine. If you look at Houston's last 6 or 7 games, it's ridiculous. They're playing Arizona, obviously, tomorrow. They've got an Iowa State game. They've got a Texas Tech game. They've got 2 Baylor games. I mean, come on. So let's not lose our sleep over Houston, because they're going to tell us who they are. And in fact, any team in those top 3 leagues, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, there's so many big games still left. The schedule makers know what they're doing. They've backloaded these things, so these games have huge stakes. These teams are going to tell us who they are. And that holds true in those 3 leagues for the bubble. Where the real mysteries are the Big East, the ACC, and below, because every week they're playing a much wider range of opponents. So I feel very secure when it comes to those top 3 leagues, that by the end, the cream's going to rise to the top, and then the bottom's going to fall out. So we'll be all good. And I think with Houston having that Kansas win and the unfortunate breaks of losing those other OT games, they're right where they should be.
Yeah, definitely in agreement. Metrics seem to love Houston, but obviously, as you alluded to, wins and losses got to matter at some point. And those 4 losses have piled up for Kelvin Sampson's Cougars. Let's talk now about the Midwest region. We got a lot of good teams in this region. This would be loaded if it comes to fruition. Alabama as the number 2 overall seed, Purdue as the number 8 overall seed, Texas Tech as the number 10 overall seed, and the Kansas Jayhawks, who we were just talking about, as the number 14 overall seed. This time we'll start with you, Sweeney. This would be a juggernaut of a Midwest region if this came to fruition.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, especially given the 2 top seeds, Purdue and Alabama's just loaded resumes in terms of quantity of big wins. I mean, those 2, I believe, are 2 and 3 in the country and quad 1+2. Purdue with the 7 quad 1 wins I mentioned earlier, Alabama up there as well. The one team I have a pretty big divide on compared to the committee consensus, or our Field in 68 consensus, is Texas Tech. I think the resume is actually a little bit softer. I wouldn't be surprised if they're on the 4 line, and maybe even a surprise cut altogether outside the top 16. Obviously, the quality metrics are phenomenal, but 2 not great losses that have not aged great to UCF at home and then St. Joe's on a neutral. Obviously, those were earlier in the year. It's a different world, but I just wonder a little bit if those results come back to bite them a little bit, in the eyes of the committee. And they have very good wins, but I don't know that they necessarily have elite wins. Other than that, at Houston win. So I think there's an interesting wide range with Texas Tech, and very interested to see how the committee views them here tomorrow, because I would be a little bit lower than our consensus is right now.
Rocco, we can come to you now, and we can just start with the point at hand with Sweeney talking about Texas Tech. What's your outlook on the Red Raiders and what you view they've got going on in Lubbock?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good debate because on one hand, you do have those 2 disappointing losses. There's nobody else really in the top 16 discussion at all with 2 subpar losses, unless you want to go to Memphis, who has the Arkansas State and Temple losses. But with Texas Tech, the other knock on them, their 291 non-conference strength of schedule is easily the worst out of this collection of teams as well. Got a little bit of a tough break in their tournament. Losing that first St. Joe's game meant they had to play Syracuse instead of Texas. So they actually hurt themselves even more because the Syracuse win's really not doing much for them at all, as we know. So those are all the negatives. Kevin did a good job laying all that out. Here's the positives. You have the win at Houston. You're the only team in the country who's won there. That's pretty damn good. They were undefeated on the road all the way until they just lost at Arizona. So they're 5-1 in true road games that are in the top 2 quadrants. That's extremely strong. And overall away neutral, they're 6-3, and that includes the St. Joe's loss. So you anchor your resume with that high-end win at Houston, which pretty much nobody else can match. And you add in a Utah trip sweep. And again, this is where the committee will be interesting, because those of us that know the mountains and know the West know how almost impossible that is to do, to go to BYU and Utah back-to-back. I think only 1 or 2 days off in between games and beat them both. Now, BYU strikes as an NCAA level win these days. BYU just coming in the first 4 to Dayton on my bracket forecast, Faxon. But going to Utah as well at altitude, playing them back-to-back, I bet you we could track this all year. I don't know how many teams can win both. So that just impresses the heck out of me. And every committee that's ever been around during my lifetime is always saying, who did you play, where did you play, and how did you do? And Texas Tech's road damage is severe. And I think that's why, in my opinion, they've earned their way to the 3-seed line.
And Rocco, I'm going to ask for you to expand a little bit on Texas Tech. We got a couple people that are in the chat pointing out the Texas A&M loss and the fact that they didn't have Toppin in that one. Do you feel like the committee is going to value that and kind of dig into the context of that loss? And also, A&M's really freaking good, as we all know, so I'm not sure that that's really a blow, if anything, to the resume.
Yeah, it certainly could be discussed as they're presenting all the results. I don't think it's something that would obviously be drilled into based on the fact that you said Texas A&M's a top 8 team themselves as a 2-seed. I think we all agree on that today. And a loss to them on a neutral court is really nothing wrong with it. And if it was, so I doubt it gets drilled into too much. We've seen what Texas Tech is with Toppin on the court, as you saw the other night, 41-15 in a ridiculously wild double OT Lubbock thriller. And of course, if they lost that game, they'd be in danger of even being mentioned today. But they got the win. And like we said, wins and losses are what matters the most.
Yeah, definitely in agreement. Sweeney, anything else to add on this front before we move on from the Midwest region?
No, I think we covered it for the most part. Again, as you said, it's a loaded one. But I think the most in Texas Tech, you could argue, maybe the most interesting team to present of all the 16 in terms of pretty wide variety in terms of where the committee might see them here this weekend.
Definitely in agreement. All right, we're going to take a quick break and have more reveal on the other side. And these breaks are brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. You can identify mid-majors and underdogs that can upset the field in March and help shake up your bracket. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. On the other side of a quick break here on Fielding the 68, we'll be revealing the East and the West region, including some big-time names like the Duke Blue Devils, Florida Gators, and more. Stick with us on Fielding the 68.
College basketball fans, are you ready to take your hoops game to a new level? Whether you're a seasoned bettor or just trying to win your March Madness office pool, Rhythm is here to give you the edge this season. With data-driven predictions for every single college basketball game left on the schedule, Rhythm helps you maximize your bets. And as March Madness kicks off, Rhythm's insights will help you spot those plucky Cinderellas that you know are going to shake up the NCAA tournament. But that's not all. When Selection Sunday rolls around, let Rhythm's AI-powered bracket generator do the heavy lifting for you. This is the same AI tool that performed 35% better than the average ESPN bracket last year. And here's the best part. Rhythm pairs perfectly with our Field of 68 expert analysis, giving you the 1-2 punch that you need for the rest of the college basketball season. So don't wait. Download Rhythm today and get ready to see college basketball and your betting results in a whole new light.
We welcome you back in, everybody, to Fielding the 68, brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Rocco Miller and Kevin Sweeney. We're going to continue with our top 16 overall seed reveals right now on Fielding the 68. And we're going to throw things immediately into the East region. We were talking about loaded regions, and this one's definitely got some star power as well. Cooper Flagg and John Shire's Blue Devils at the number 3 overall seed. You got the Tennessee Volunteers, who had been steady on that one line for us here at Fielding the 68 prior to the last week or two. The Wisconsin Badgers at the number 12 overall seed, and then Arizona Wildcats at number 13. Overall, Rocco, we can start with you here. Talk to me a little bit about how you view the consensus of the East region. And obviously, Tennessee and Florida have been two teams that have been shuffled to an extent here in this week's installment.
Yeah, so I mean, from Duke's perspective, they go from 2 to 3 after their loss at Clemson. That's about a week old now of news. But the good news for Duke is they're still going to Newark, their preferred site, and of course Raleigh for the first 2 games. So overall, Duke's path to the Final Four doesn't change. And then in Tennessee's case, like we talked about, they are the best of the 2 seeds quite clearly, I would say. But the good news there is they get to stay in the East. So they'll also be able to go to Newark as their regional site. One of the interesting things there is Raleigh is going to be full because of Duke being closer. And of course, Florida is going to take Raleigh away from Tennessee. So there's only 2 pods that can go to Raleigh. So Tennessee would actually go to Cleveland. But besides that, they got the same preferred East region. So not all bad news for the Vols. And of course, 1 or 2 game days away from being a 1 seed once again. If things break right, they take care of their business and get some help. Now we get into the more interesting part, which I think is I would actually have Arizona a 3 seed today. I know they do have the 7 losses, so that makes it a little bit tough. But Arizona, from a performance standpoint, is a top 10 team. And, typically, if all other things are equal, the seeding can sometimes go that way. It'd be really interesting to see where Arizona lands. Here, we're not far off from what I'm saying. We have them as the best number 4. So 13 is the start of the 4 seeds, of course. And with Wisconsin, I think they're more clearly a 4 seed to me than a 3. I get it if you just kind of average everything out. Maybe Wisconsin sneaks in as that last 3, and that's where we had them. But I just think they don't have a meaningful win away from home against the field. I know they blew out Arizona head-to-head, but when you do it on your home court, it really is less impactful as a body of work discussion. And, so I would actually have those 2 flipped. I would have Arizona the 3 and Wisconsin the 4. So I'm a little fascinated by this.
Sweeney, Rocco's kind of laid out his case of this region. How are you seeing things, and what are your thoughts on those final 2 teams that Rocco said he would personally have flipped?
Yeah, it's close. I mean, again, I think that is where the challenge of the head-to-head discussion comes in. Like, it would weigh for me, not just, it's one thing if it's a close game, but, Wisconsin pretty thoroughly dominated Arizona. Obviously, Arizona, you could argue, is a different team then, very early in the year, I think second Friday of the season. But one of the many things that the committee has to consider, especially if it is close, would be that head-to-head matchup, and Wisconsin certainly rolled there. But I think both teams are sort of on that bubble between 3 and 4. You could see it go either way. I would certainly expect to see both teams in the top 16 overall, but where they fall on the seed list, I think open to interpretation committee-wise. And then at the top, no real complaints. Would have Duke 3rd and Tennessee 5th as well. As Rocco said, the most interesting part of that is really the machinations about where teams head for the first round. And then, obviously, Sweet 16, Elite 8. Duke keeping its preferred path. Tennessee's path maybe getting a little bit more complicated if its fans want to head out to see those first round games.
Yeah, definitely in agreement there. And, on the Duke tangent, they've got a pretty advantageous schedule down the stretch as well. So, it feels not certain that they're going to be able to lock up a 1 seed, but obviously in a weaker ACC this year, you already got the Clemson game out of the way. That was really their last challenge. Obviously, North Carolina, you got emotions with the rivalry matchup, but they just got blown out by 20 as well and seem like they're in free fall. I'm sure we'll get to that at some point in the final segment. All right, we've gone through the East region. It's now time for the West region with a new number 1 seed and a couple SEC teams that'll catch people's eyes. Let's take a look now at the consensus for what the West region is looking like. The Florida Gators, they've earned it, man. 2 big ones this week, as we alluded to earlier in the program, the number 4 overall seed. It was a rough first half for Buzz Williams' Aggies in College Station, and they romped the Georgia Bulldogs in the second half. You got the Cyclones getting Milan back into the mix as the number 9 overall seed. And then one of the biggest risers of this past week, as Rocco identified in the first segment, the Michigan Wolverines at number 15 overall. Sweeney, we'll start with you this time. Talk me through how you're seeing the West region.
Yeah, a lot of alignment here. I had Florida number 4 overall. I would have Texas A&M at 6, but 6, 7, 8 between Texas A&M, Purdue, and Houston, all pretty comparable. I also had Iowa State at 9 and Michigan in that 4 seed range. I had them actually 13th overall, but all things considered, relatively close. Again, we're splitting hairs on the margins at this point. The one thing that I would point out with this group is, Michigan finally getting that, big win. I was having a hard time before that Michigan win over Purdue, even having them in the top 4 altogether. Now I was in a position where I felt they were potentially the strongest of the 4 seeds, 19-5. I also think, again, we're not to this point yet, but the committee does I think at least, maybe whether they say it or not, does value a conference championship to some degree. Michigan winning the Big Ten would be an accomplishment that they could a feather they could put in their cap. At 11-2 right now would be the Big Ten champion. That's something to monitor. If they can pull that off, I think it would say a lot about their candidacy to climb up the seed list here. So interested to see where they come in. Obviously, this whole Big Ten pecking order, I think we'll address this a little bit as we wrap up the show here, but. How does the committee see Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, and then maybe even you could add Illinois into that mix as pretty strong contenders in the top 16? How do you order them? How many of them get in? That'll be an interesting thing to watch tomorrow.
Yeah, for certain. And Rocco, throwing things to you now. Are you pretty aligned as well with what we're seeing in the West region? Obviously, Todd Golden's Gators moving up to the number 1 seed line.
So yeah, the first two teams on the list there, Florida and Texas A&M, absolutely aligned. Besides, like Kevin, I had A&M 6th overall instead of 7th. Real small difference there. Not offended by it. Hopefully, Texas A&M fans can handle San Francisco. We'd love to have you. But outside of that, we're moving on to this Iowa State decision, and that's where I was a little different. I had Iowa State also a 2 seed. So this would immediately become the most difficult region, which makes sense. If you're the 4th number 1 seed, you should have the toughest region by logic. Doesn't always play out that way, but Iowa State I had narrowly edging out Purdue. It's still either way, so I really don't mind the consensus here going with Iowa State 9. And Purdue I think was 8 when you showed them earlier. But I just think with Iowa State's road win at Texas Tech, they obviously had a bad week and a half, but they've started to right the ship pretty quickly. I think the one naysay you could have is that Kansas State home loss, but that the damage done from that was already factored into their performance numbers. And even after all that, they're still performing at the same level as Purdue. I like the weight of the Texas Tech road win more than the weight of Purdue's best road win, which is Oregon. And overall, everything else is pretty equal except for the one fewer loss for the Cyclones. So I think that's a nice little cleaner resume for the 2 line. That was my biggest difference. Otherwise, we're good. And then last but not least, of course, I'm glad Kevin said the Michigan being the Big Ten leader. That's really important, especially in that league. As we all know, the Big Ten championship game in the tournament happens hours before the bracket actually gets announced. So obviously the committee's done with their work. The contingency brackets are built out just in case there's a wild upset on that last day in any of those 3 or 4 tournaments. But in Michigan's case, when they go through the practice of seeding, selecting, etc., they would be represented as the Big Ten champion. And if they get to that week and win the regular season title, that's the biggest thing, because that will give them an extra feather in their cap. It'll show up on the team sheet, etc. And that will be interesting too. Like Kevin said, with we had Wisconsin as a 3 as a consensus. So that we're saying that Wisconsin's above Michigan. That will be interesting because Michigan did win at Wisconsin. It's the anchor of their resume. Plus, Michigan adds a road win at UCLA, and they beat Purdue at home. We talked about that a lot during the biggest winners. So very curious to see where the Wolverines land.
Yeah, definitely curious to see what Dusty May is able to accomplish up in Ann Arbor down the stretch. And if they can hold on to that outright possession of the lead in the league, obviously that would be a big resume bolster as well down the stretch. All right, we've revealed the top 16. If you missed any of it, let's breeze through this real quick. South Region, Auburn, Houston, Kentucky, St. John's. Midwest Region, Alabama, Purdue, Texas Tech, and Kansas. East Region, Duke, Tennessee, Wisconsin, and Arizona. And West Region, Florida, Texas A&M, Iowa State, and Michigan. Rocco, we can stay with you for my next question here, which is outside of those 16 seeds that we've named overall, who else is in the mix to get in this thing as we trend towards March?
So the one team I had in that the consensus did not is the Ole Miss Rebels. And one thing that was interesting about Ole Miss was I had them as a 5 seed on Monday. And as we were really trying to hone in on this top 16, I think the negative about Ole Miss is they are still 5-6 in the quad 1. So they're under 500, which again is not ideal. But outside of that, there's no bad. They haven't lost anything outside of the quad 1. And the reason for is obviously the road win at Alabama, just massive. I mean, nobody in this area has that. They add a road win at Louisville. Louisville, of course, is a top 8 seed as well. So 2 just really strong road wins, something that Wisconsin can't offer, something Michigan State can't offer. Even Kansas doesn't have a true road win like that, or even close to those 2. They have good neutral wins. And then you add in Ole Miss's neutral court win over BYU, which I think was overlooked for a while. Now BYU's looked at as a tournament team where I'm sitting. So that gives them 3 really good wins away from home. The next reason for Ole Miss is they're 8-4 road neutral. That actually compares very well compared to anybody 3 or 4 seed. And 5-3 in those road games, quad 1 and 2. So all the things the committee typically cares about is Ole Miss. We all know who Ole Miss's head coach is. So we'll see if that's any kind of negative impact by the committee. It shouldn't be. And I certainly think Ole Miss belongs in this top 16.
Yeah, and Chris Beard's definitely got him playing great basketball in Oxford right now. Sweeney, we'll throw things to you. First and foremost, what are your thoughts on Ole Miss? And then bring another team into the mix that's still on the outside looking into the top 16 that you feel like has a chance.
Yeah, Rocco made a pretty strong case for Ole Miss. I think they certainly belong in the conversation. I'm sure the folks doing the bracketing, the last thing they want to do is add yet another SEC team into the mix, into the protected range. But if they have to do it, they have to do it. The resumes have to speak for themselves. I'll take, again, a Big Ten slant. I actually had Michigan State as that last 4 seed. Perhaps maybe not enough of a reaction to that loss, which is not great. But I do still like their body of work with the pair of really good road wins at Ohio State, at UCLA. Both have aged well lately. Or excuse me, they didn't win at UCLA. They beat Illinois, was their other strong win. So the one road win at Ohio State is nice. The Illinois win is nice. The losses aren't really bad outside of that, as you said, quad 2B Indiana game that you don't love. The one team I am actually interested in that I think makes an intriguing late case is Maryland. I know the committee is at times both during the top 16 and in the selection itself has been a little bit hesitant to move much after getting close to showtime. But Maryland's road win last night at Nebraska was another feather in the cap. This is an interesting group. At Illinois, big time win. At Nebraska is a nice road conference victory. They have 6 quad 1 wins now. The metrics are very strong from a quality standpoint. Top 17 KenPom, 15 T rank, 18 BPI, and now that resume metrics up into the mid 20s. I think they'd be a team to at least keep an eye on here as we get towards top 16 reveal time tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely an agreement there, Sweeney. Maybe an underrated team. Rocco, throwing things to you before we close out this segment. Anybody else you want to bring into the mix here? I saw a couple people in the chat going with Marquette, saying that maybe they've got a chance to get in this thing down the stretch.
No doubt. So, yeah, we met as a group, a number of us bracketologists yesterday to talk through this. And it's interesting, Maryland wasn't mentioned because, that late win last night over Nebraska – when the meeting started, didn't factor in. And I'm assuming with the committee this week, that probably happened too. I knew they all flew into Indianapolis earlier in the week. So we'll see if that makes a difference. But I think each conference did a good job not scheduling big games here today or yesterday. I know UCLA's got Indiana tonight, but in previous years, there's been upsets right before the show, and it didn't make the committee look good. For example, San Diego State being included last year after getting upset the night before. So maybe they work together to prevent that. But with Marquette, they're definitely in the running. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They won at that Maryland team. They're the only team to win at Maryland all year. And they also have a nice neutral court win over Georgia, 5 overall wins against the field. They've been in control of the Big East for a lot of the earlier / halfway point of the season. Obviously, they relinquished that with the loss to St. John's. But they don't have a bad loss. They have positive road records in both categories, top 2 quads away games and overall road neutral. But just a lot of these close wins, like going to overtime with DePaul, having another close DePaul game, just 2 easy examples. A lot of close wins have made their performance stuff look more like a 6 or a 7 seed. And their resume is a top 4 seed. So that's why if they're getting in with a just good enough resume. But if they start factoring in some of that performance, it just slightly knocks Marquette out. I have Marquette number 18, by the way, overall. So a very safe 5 seed, which means they're close. They definitely are getting discussed. The other one I would say is Memphis, mainly because Memphis quite clearly has a top 16 resume, even better than Marquette's. They're averaging a 14.5 in all the different resume measurements. But even more impressive is their 5-0 true road record after that win at South Florida last night. I know you guys were watching that game. And 11-2 overall road neutral is just amazing. Obviously, they play in a weaker league, but they've proven it by winning at Clemson, your boys, Faxon, and beating Michigan State, UConn, even San Francisco on a quote-unquote neutral court. That game was in San Francisco, by the way. So Memphis is like, how are these guys not a top 16? But you do all their performance work. You factor in the subpar losses to Arkansas State and Temple. and they shake out to about a 5 seed, unfortunately for them. But I do think Memphis is getting discussed as well. And then the other two that we discussed were Michigan State. Kevin did a good job talking about them. And Illinois was also discussed. In the end, I didn't really strongly consider Illinois. They have 8 losses. It's a lot of losses for this time. And not enough huge wins. They've won at Oregon. They beat Mizzou, of course, in their neutral court battle. But otherwise, they're 500 in their big games, 7-7 in quad one. Just not enough oomph. Obviously, when they're on fire, they're a Final Four contender. They're a top 12 metrics team in performance, but the resume is just not there. And then the final punch to the gut in Champaign is that home loss to USC, even though the big man was out.
Yeah, definitely in agreement, Rocco. And on the Memphis Clemson front, I think Tyrese Hunter had 23 that night in an OT win. They're very impressive, and their guard play can compete with almost anyone in the country. In your opinion, final thing on Memphis, I know we got to take a quick break. Do you feel like it's the 2 quad 3 losses that's really dragging down the resume more than anything else right now for Penny Hardaway's group?
It's that, but like even with all that factored in, they're still a top 15 resume. So I think it's more so just the way they win. You know, it's they have a hard situation. They play in a league where everybody knows them very well. Game plans the hell out of them. Memphis is still winning those games, but a lot of them are close. That crushes their net, crushes their Torvik, crushes their Ken Pom, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at performance, they look like a bubble team, but we all know they have pros. PJ Haggerty looks like a first-round pick for sure. So that's where the committee thing is really interesting, because a committee can look at those wins and say Memphis belongs, and we might see their name. But then you could also look at the other way, and maybe they got dismissed early. So just another intriguing story for tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely intriguing. All right, we've got to take a quick break here on the program. And these breaks, as always, are brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. You can access expert-backed predictions for every remaining college basketball game, from rivalries to sleeper matchups. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. On the other side of a quick break, we're going to be doing last 4 in, first 4 out, and next 4 out, and wrapping things up with some games to watch this upcoming weekend. Stick with us on Fielding the 68. You won't want to miss the final segment.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today.
We welcome you back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. It is the final segment of the Friday edition here on the program. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Kevin Sweeney and Rocco Miller. It's been a fun show throughout the course of the show today, revealing the top 16 overall seeds. But now it's time for, I think, what everybody's favorite part of the show is, and that is bubble talk. We've been saving the best for last, if you will. So let's jump right into it. We've got consensus for all of these, and we're going to start with the last 4 in consensus here at Fielding the 68. Obviously, there's been a lot of movement along the bubble throughout the course of the last week of college hoops. So let's take a quick look at that now. Guys, we're going to come to you first on this, Sweeney. BYU, Arkansas, who has crept into a lot of people's field. Georgia with a big matchup pending tomorrow night, which I'm sure Rocco will hammer home as he'll be there in Athens, Georgia against Missouri. And then a Wake Forest team that's holding on for dear life after a tough loss at home to Florida State. Sweeney, how are you seeing the last 4 in? Are you aligned with the consensus?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I was a little bit more positive on some of the teams lacking the top end wins, but stronger in the metrics category. I look at a VCU and an SMU potentially knocking on the door. I just look at the number of opportunities some of these teams get, and you can see it on the bottom line here. I mean, Arkansas and Georgia 5-9 against the top two quadrants, 8-9 overall in Rocco's meaningful games metric, which is quad 1, 2, and 3. I believe Arkansas also 8-9 against the top three quadrants. When you get that number of opportunities that they do, you'd like to see them take advantage of it. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't, right? I think Georgia's still in good shape. Big one, obviously, tomorrow in Athens. Got to find a way to win it against, I believe, Missouri. But that would be the one to circle. And then for me with Wake, there was already a level of skepticism you had to have with them because of the very poor quality metrics. And now you add in the bad loss against Florida State. To me, that was too much to overcome. I left them out of my field earlier this week at Sports Illustrated. But they're right there. And that game against SMU is as bubblicious as it gets tomorrow. SMU desperately in need of any sort of quality wins. That's the one thing that's lacking from their resume. And Wake in need of another quad 1 to balance out that bad quad 3.
Rocco, throwing things to you now on this last 4N talk. You said that this was the first time all year that you had Arkansas in your field. Consensus agrees with you, and you'll also be in Athens, Georgia tomorrow for a game that could really impact Georgia's NCAA tournament hopes against a good Missouri team.
No doubt. Yeah. Well, with Arkansas, first of all, they have 4 wins you can point to. And in the bubble, you need stuff like that to look at, especially if you're from the best league. And with Arkansas's wins, just getting the win at Kentucky, backing it up with the win at Texas. They also beat Georgia at home, which counts for whatever it's worth. And the neutral court win over Michigan in the Jimmy V and Michigan's rise. I think that also kind of played into it a little bit too. When you're getting to the end, you're trying to pick these last 4 teams. There's a lot of, at least the way I do it, there's a ton of evaluation. And you're just trying to figure out like what impresses you most. Now, Arkansas is falling short in that meaningful category 8 and 9. So my initial thought is you can't put a team like that in unless they've done something extraordinary. Well, you could make the case for Arkansas being extraordinary because they won at Rupp Arena and they beat Michigan. And then they've got a couple other pieces of evidence to back that up. So them and Ohio State are the only 2 teams in my field to be a game under 500 because they both did extraordinary things, Faxon. Ohio State is the only team to win at Purdue. They also beat Kentucky on a neutral court as well. So Ohio State, I agree with the consensus. They're in the 10 seed area, but they're also close to falling out because they're just losing too much. On Georgia's side, I have Georgia out. They're in the same boat, 8 and 9 in the meaningful games, but Georgia doesn't have the extraordinary to point to at this point. Now they're in the SEC, so this stuff is changing every day. A Missouri home win will get them back in the field on Monday because it'll get them back to 500 and give them another great win. But when you look at what Georgia's done on the road, there's a severe problem developing. They've played 7 important road games. They're just 1-6. The one win was Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's not a tournament team. VCU has beaten 4 teams in the A10 that are the same level as Georgia Tech. So VCU, to me, is more impressive than Georgia because they're doing it on the road. Not to mention all the losing that Georgia's done. Now, we like that neutral court win over St. John's. It's good, but it's not a true road win. And outside of that, all Georgia's done at home is beat Kentucky, another really good win. It's a home game, though. Same with the Oklahoma win. So I think it was pretty easy for me to leave Georgia out if I'm picking between the SEC options, which I have to do. And then lastly, Wake Forest. I ended up keeping Wake Forest out of the field today. You could easily select them for the reasons we've been selecting them. Now they add that Florida State home loss, and it gets really challenging because with Wake Forest, their only real win you can point at is the neutral Michigan win, which is a great win. Like, we love that win. And they got a couple decent road wins in the Bay Area road trip. I was at the Stanford game. They also took care of business at Cal. But in their 6 true road opportunities, they're just 2 and 4 in the top 2 quadrants. They do a ton of quad 3 damage. So they're very difficult to evaluate, but you would just like to see a little more evidence than the one win against the field. I think Wake Forest got to go get another win at this point, so I left them out.
Yeah, and that's understandable, up 16 with less than 8 minutes left and just not able to get the job done against Florida State. And, they asked Forbes about something in the postgame that I found interesting. And obviously, I cover the ACC, so I'm pretty plugged in with all this. the track record for teams in the game returning from the West Coast trip in the ACC this year is just absolutely catastrophic. It's not an excuse for any of the teams dropping bad games, but we heard Mick Cronin talk about the travel element with what they're dealing with in their league. The ACC is dealing with that as well to a lesser degree, and obviously with lesser quality teams in Cal and Stanford, but it's not going out there. It's that game when you get back. So Wake Forest kind of followed with the trend of what's going on there in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Let's shift gears.
Sorry, Faxon, I was just going to pop in real quick. Wake had some pretty severe travel issues getting back, that they were supposed to. They played Saturday. They didn't take the red eye home. They were flying commercially, which is rare in college basketball these days at the highest level. But that's what they chose to do. They didn't take the red eye. They wanted to fly during the day on Sunday. Their flight got canceled when they woke up. So then they were in a situation of, okay, if we sit out today and we get a red eye home on Sunday night into Monday, and we play, Tuesday night, we're totally screwed, or Wednesday night we're totally screwed. So catching up was very difficult. They ended up sending a private jet for 12 people, which I think was like their 8 rotation players and a couple of staff members could go back home, and they flew Sunday. The rest of the staff had to wait and catch that red eye. So not a great situation by any means. Again, you're up 16, you got to win the game. That's the reality. But those are the little things that do kind of poke away at a resume, and you're not always going to be at your best. And Wake certainly wasn't when they lost that Florida State game.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, and that's some great context to add into that, Sweeney. Thank you for that. And just it is what it is with Wake Forest. They've been, knocking on the doorstep of the NCAA tournament the last 2 seasons, and now, whether you got them in or you got them out, there's work to be done, and that's undeniable for Steve Forbes' group up in Winston-Salem. Let's take a look now at our consensus first 4 out. Obviously, you two had a couple of the teams that were in on the outside. This is what the consensus has. You got SMU, who's 19-5, 10-3 in the ACC, but still with 0 quad 1 wins on the resume. A VCU team that Rocco brought up. UC San Diego, who's an absolute wagon, in my opinion. I think that this team should be in, just based on seeing them with my eye test. Unfortunately, the committee doesn't care what I think. And then, of course, you got the Texas Longhorns, who still have some work to do. Rocco, we can start with you. You mentioned VCU earlier, and I know you've got the local ties with UC San Diego to an extent, and you've watched that team a lot. Talk to me a little bit about where you're at on the consensus first 4 out.
Yeah, so I'll start with SMU. I landed there with the group as a team out. They end up being listed as my 3rd team out. To me, it doesn't matter. If you're out, you're out. But the bottom line is, even though they got the nice win over Pitt, and we put them in on Monday, that's the confusing part. When you have teams like Ohio State in my world jumping back in, they don't have anything to look at. There's just nothing to look at. They don't have a road win against the field. They've beaten everybody that's not in the field. So they're just there. They're just there waiting to get picked. It's like at recess when you're picking Red Rover partners. SMU's just sitting there. Hey, we're here. Unfortunately for the Mustangs, they're brand new to the ACC. They only got to play the big dogs once each. They still get that big home game with your boys, Clemson. That's going to be a paramount game for them. And they got a couple other, chances at a base hit with Wake Forest coming to town and a couple other decent ones. So if SMU just keeps winning, I want everybody to know SMU winning still matters. They're 8-2 away from home. There are things to like. What they're doing is not necessarily easy, but at the same time, there's better options. And if there's better options, they're going to get left behind. So that's my thing on SMU. With VCU, I've got the Rams still in the field. I had them in on Monday. Again, they're a little controversial. Of course, they have that Seton Hall loss that just ruined them. That was before Seton Hall fell apart. Nobody at the time knew that would end up being quad 4. They fight to get into an event with a power conference team. So to lose it in overtime and get punished for it is some interesting irony. That's for sure. But at the end of the day, the body of work's what matters. And they're 4-3 in the top 2 quad true road games. And I think that's a really good thing to look at for the bubble. Adding that George Washington win gets them in a plus territory in road record in, somewhat decent to hard competition. And they've got wins in each of the quadrants, and they have a nice 8-5 overall record away from home. They do have 4 subpar losses to teams not in the field. So you could easily argue VCU to be out. I just prefer them to some of these under 500 power conference teams. And, we'll see how it plays out. They still have that big George Mason game next week. with the UC San Diego Tritons, I'm all the way in on them being a tournament team. I mean, they went to Utah State. Utah State's only lost 3 times all year, and they won the freaking game. Then they go to Irvine, a team that's, right around the cut line, you could probably argue, or maybe a little below at this point. But they go in there and beat them by 18 in the biggest game of the year. I mean, these guys continue to show up and show out. They went to, Bakersfield, whatever, yesterday. It counts as quad 3, I think. But they just blow everybody out. They play such a great style of basketball. Their loss to Seattle University didn't age well. That's also in quad 4 right now. So they have to deal with that. That was an interesting set of circumstances there. I won't go into details. But I do think the fact that they have 2 really strong road wins, and if you look at the San Diego State game, that was opening night, and they had the lead all the way through until 5 minutes to go, end up losing by 5. So they're right there. They could have won all 3 of those big ones. They go 2-1, and otherwise been near perfect. So they get one more decent game at Cal State Northridge. I think it's next week. That will get them another game into quad 2. Their win at Santa Barbara is now a quad 2. And their freaking 12-2 away neutral record is superior. So I'm all the way in on UC San Diego. And now I forgot who the 4th team was, but it doesn't matter. They're out.
It was Texas. A couple
way out. Yeah.
A couple points. I'm shocked that Dagan didn't cut your mic for the unprompted Seton Hall slander for first and foremost. And number 2.
Sorry about that.
That was 24 straight home wins for UC Irvine prior to the game against you. I don't think people who aren't as tapped in with what's going on the West Coast understand the significance of going into that building and winning. February 23rd, 2023 is the last time Irvine lost a game at home prior to UC San Diego, not just going to Irvine, but blowing out Irvine a couple weeks back. So, Rocco, if it's just me and you against the world, buddy, we're going to push that propaganda for UC San Diego because I know what my eyes are telling me. And that team's pretty damn good. Sweeney, anything to add here on the first 4 out?
Yeah, I mean, it's well covered. Agreeing with Rocco on VCU would be my main thing. I hope, especially with the non-Power 5 teams, you look at the intent to schedule in the committee. Like VCU goes out and plays Seton Hall, Miami, and Boston College, 3 high major games. Hard to get as an A10 school. Just turns out that those 3 wind up being 3 of the worst high major teams in the country this year. But Seton Hall coming off winning the NIT, Miami bad last year, but the year before was a Final Four team. You didn't necessarily expect that those would not age well. Even neutral Nevada looked like an at-large type team when they played them. Not anything more or not anymore. You schedule Colorado State; they're an at-large team from a year ago on a neutral court. You go to New Mexico. VCU wanted to schedule tough. They did what they could to build a resume. It just hasn't necessarily worked out. They're also a team to watch in terms of wins breaking one direction or another on the quadrants. Maybe it matters a little less this year, but you'd like to see those numbers go up. Dayton on the road is a huge win for multiple A10 teams that they will be hoping stays in the top 75 as a quad 1 road win. Certainly a very good win if you can win at UD Arena, but everybody would like that to be top 75, so there's no confusion in the committee room as to the importance of that victory.
Yeah, definitely in agreement there, Sweeney. And I think those are some great points. And Sweeney, we'll come to you first for our final kind of bubble breakdown here with the next 4 out from the consensus here at Fielding the 68. We've got Indiana, Kansas State, Boise State, and Xavier. Indiana and Kansas State kind of making up the back from the dead segment of this, if you will. Obviously, Kansas State's playing some of the best basketball in the country right now. Boise State's lurking around the tournament picture. They've got a win over Clemson as well on the resume, and Q1, Q2 record isn't too shabby. Xavier kind of lurking in the shadows. Any strong opinions or any thoughts on these 4 teams, Sweeney?
I don't know that I would say strong opinions. I would say that it's a very big weekend for a lot of these teams. Kansas State could leave this weekend if they swept that Utah trip, probably in the field. They lose those 2 games. You're 13-13 all of a sudden. The path to the dance gets really, really challenging. So at minimum, you need a split. If you're K-State, you'd love a sweep. For Indiana, they have that UCLA game here tonight. That's, I would say, close to a must-win on their home court if they want to stay in the serious conversation. And then you've got Boise State, which has sort of quietly creeped back into the conversation. This has been a team that has consistently been an at-large team the last couple of years, playing their best basketball of the season right now. And Boise gets a huge test at Viejas against San Diego State on Saturday, but a San Diego State team that has been a little bit vulnerable. Win that game on the road, all of a sudden the Boise State resume looks a lot different.
Yeah, definitely an agreement there, Sweeney. A big one out on the West Coast in Viejas. Rocco, anything to add before we go around the horn and talk about games to watch?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the Kansas State thing's the big topic. Hottest team in the country, not by the way they shot the other night, obviously, but by the way that they've been just steamrolling amazing wins, both beating Arizona and Iowa State most namely. And I think you have to start to look, the team with so many bad efforts earlier in the year. They had a stretch where they lost 9 of 10. They got blown out by Wichita State. I mean, come on. And they got blown out by Oklahoma State, a team towards the bottom of the league. They lost to TCU. So all that still counts the same as these great wins. But as Kansas State continues to make their move here, they've got some reasonably winnable games on paper. They get Colorado at home. That'll be in March. They get Cincinnati on the road. Not an easy win, and obviously Cincinnati's an interesting kind of weird team themselves. But the way K-State's playing, if they can stay at this level, you should be able to beat the Cincinnatis of the world. You should be able to get down to UCF and get a win. You should be able to beat Arizona State, although they're all over the map themselves. If Kansas State can just clean it up, they don't have to play the top of the Big 12 is my overall point until that last game of the season at home in the second game of the Iowa State series. So Kansas State, their biggest thing is they just want to keep getting wins to, undo some of those losses. They'll get an opportunity at BYU tomorrow, which is massive. BYU, one of the last teams in. Kansas State trying to take their place eventually. So I think there's a really reasonable path if the Wildcats stay at this level to get their way in there.
Yeah, they're playing some of the best basketball in the country right now. And, prior to the last game against Arizona, shooting the lights out. I know that they both had rough shooting nights in Manhattan that night, but I think it was like 43% from three as a team over the previous 5 games. That'll do it. That can help you rattle off a win streak. Rocco, we'll stick with you as we go around the horn for games to watch this weekend. And obviously, Auburn, Alabama is going to steal the show, but we got a lot of great hoops outside of that.
Yeah, for sure. So starting tonight, UCLA at Indiana. Indiana was just shown on our next 4 out towards that second group. But Indiana, of course, got the big road win at Michigan State. The Hoosiers are sitting there 3-10 in their hardest 13 games, so it's really difficult to put them in. But as you get through the quadrants, they really don't have any bad. So you start stacking wins against tournament level competition. UCLA certainly qualifies there. The Hoosiers are going to keep getting more interesting. The win percentage is just you can't go 3-10 and have that poor of a win percentage. Like last year, for example, Oklahoma was one of the first teams out. They went 4-12 in that category. Just 25% of the time they're getting a win. But if Indiana can get that win percentage above 40% and closer to 50, and then they're still solid with those Q2 and Q3 wins, Hoosiers definitely have a path. Obviously, I'll be at Georgia. Come say hi if you're going to be in Athens. Looking forward to it. My first visit. The Mizzou Tigers, one of the more intriguing SEC teams with a very high ceiling, are visiting. As we said, Georgia's right there on the cut line. I have them as the second team out. The consensus has them as the second to last team in. So no matter which side you're looking on, it's every game for these Bulldogs is huge. Their environments from afar have looked incredible. That Kentucky win, namely, fans were electric all 40 minutes. Hopefully they're bringing that kind of juice tomorrow. Really looking forward to that. And then Texas. We didn't get into Texas. I quickly dismissed them. They're about 2 wins away from getting back in my opinion. Big opportunity against Kentucky. And I think it's a big game for both sides of the coin. If they beat Kentucky, obviously they're very interesting to include on Monday. And that yo-yo keeps continuing as they keep playing SEC teams. But if they lose, then they're going to be 3 games behind the 8 ball. And things are going to get really, really hairy in Austin in a hurry. So just a critical mass type of game for the Longhorns. And then for Kentucky, they're continuing to stack this crazy road resume. They can add another one to the mix. Last game I'll mention before I turn it to Kevin is Houston at Arizona. I think following the Big 12, this has been the game that a lot of people have circled. When are these two teams? Like Houston was in the American Conference a couple of years ago. Arizona was in the Pac-12. Now they're conference rivals. What are we doing? But it's a massive game. The environment at McHale is always insane. It's going to be through the roof for this one. Houston loves that stuff. They thrive off that stuff. I just think the juice that comes through the television set, if you have a chance to watch it, is going to be high-level college basketball.
Yeah, definitely an agreement. And Sweeney, walk us through what you are going to have your eyes on this weekend in the college hoop slate that's absolutely loaded.
Yeah, Rocco covered a lot of it. Just a couple games on Sunday to keep an eye on as well. Michigan at Ohio State, obviously a rivalry game there. Ohio State looking to maybe not lock themselves in, but I think if you added another pretty strong win, it would certainly help their case quite a bit. If they lose it, you're looking up and you're 15-11. You've got 3 more road games. How much can you walk this tightrope here in terms of the quantity of losses? Creighton at St. John's, a big game. Utah State, New Mexico is a monster on Sunday. New Mexico at 21-4, but 2 bad losses. Sort of walking an interesting line. I think in good shape for selection, but these next 3 games should tell us a lot. Utah State at home and then at Boise, at San Diego State. I think if they win 2 of those 3, it's probably pretty comfortable come Selection Sunday. 1 or 0, maybe you're sweating. And then I would also circle Bradley at Drake. Really good Missouri Valley game. Just a great basketball game if you're looking for fun hoops to watch. But Drake's at-large candidacy, maybe they can afford 1 more loss, but that would be a likely third quad 3 loss when it's all said and done. Right now it's only 1-1, but I would not be surprised if that UIC loss on the road ends up falling out of those top 2 quadrants. So if you're Drake, you probably want to avoid a third there against Bradley. So circle that one as the 23-2 Bulldogs try to make an at-large case.
Yeah, a lot of storylines, a lot of great hoops, and can't wait to just fast forward to tomorrow and start to unpack, or maybe even tonight, as we were talking about with a couple of good games on the slate tonight. Kevin, Rocco, a pleasure as always. Great job, guys. I really enjoyed it today. Signing off now on Fielding the 68 for Dagan Hughes, the rest of the crew back at Mission Control. I'm Faxon Childress. We will see you on Monday, everybody, for a very special show here on Fielding the 68 with a full bracket reveal. Happy college hoops watching in the weekend, and whoever you're rooting for, hope your team wins.